and you're not hearing anything, we're going to get started in about 1 minute. All right, guys, it's 1 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for attending this webinar on Advanced REST API Scripting with AppDynamics. For those of you who don't know, my name is Todd Raydell. I've been with the company for about 3 years. Started as a technical account manager, and I now manage our enablement team on the East Coast. A lot of you have met me before. If you haven't, this is a good time to get introduced. So I've been working in the industry for a little over 20 years. I work in a variety of languages, and I am heavily involved with our REST API and our community extensions. So you can see there a list of the ones that I've built for the company. And I always love to help customers expand their infrastructure and their monitoring with additional extensions. On the left, you have my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to reach me at any time. So this is actually the second webinar on the REST API that we've done. The first one Brad did a couple of months ago and introduced some of the basics on how to make REST API requests and do it from the command line, things like that. Today, we're going to build on that and do it with some scripting languages. A lot of people ask about how to automate REST API tasks for deployments, for making their own reports, for exporting data into a company dashboard. So I'm going to show you how to do that in a couple of languages, mostly focusing on Python, but I am going to touch on a few others. So I'm going to start with a basic hello world script in a couple of languages, and then we're going to move into using the Python SDK that I built for AppDynamics, and a couple of hands-on demonstrations. You can see a license usage report, enabling and disabling health rules, and then after I'm done, we'll open the floor up for Q&A and what we call office hours. If you have questions about the REST API that I haven't covered, if you need help getting your own script working, it's just open time to ask questions, okay? In the meantime, if you have any questions as we go, you can type them into the chat window, and our gracious moderator will post them to me, okay? In the meantime, we have everyone's audio muted so that we don't hear a lot of background noise, okay? Good. All right, so getting started with the REST API, some simple requests. If you attended the first webinar, you probably saw one of the easiest requests was just getting a list of applications out of the controller. Your business applications in AppDynamics. So how do we get them from the REST API? What can we do with it? So I'm going to show you how to do it in a couple of different ways: Bash, PowerShell for you Windows guys, and then I'm going to show you 2 ways to do it in Python. Okay. The nice thing about REST API is it's not magic. It's just HTTP and XML or JSON, which you can do in almost any programming language these days. So I'm going to show you these languages, but if you would rather do it in Java or C# or Ruby or Groovy or whatever your favorite language is, the approach is pretty much the same. I'm just going to show you a couple of examples. So the first one just a simple bash script using curl. Curl is installed by default on most flavors of Linux and Unix. If it's not, it's easy enough to download, and it's a command line utility for making web requests. Okay, so you can see here I'm connecting to a controller on localhost. Obviously, you would put in your URL to your own controller. And you can see I've got my test credentials in there. So obviously these are the defaults, and I hope you've changed yours. But so this is basically just making a GET request to get the list of applications and output it as JSON. So if I go ahead and do that myself, I have a controller running on my own machine. If I paste that in, you can see the answer I get. I get some nicely formatted JSON that has a list of my business applications. Okay, pretty straightforward. So I can do the same thing in PowerShell on Windows. You can see here this is a simple script. I've got my username and password at the top, and then I build the HTTP authentication, and there's the URL to the controller again on localhost. I use a function in PowerShell called invoke REST method. Was introduced with PowerShell 4, I believe, which came out a year or two ago. If you have a really old version of PowerShell, you may not have invoke REST method, but there are similar commands in older versions of PowerShell. May just require a few extra lines of code. But so invoke REST method calls this URL, and it expects to get JSON in response. So I take that JSON and I loop through and I print the ID and name of each application. Okay, so that's the basics in PowerShell. So moving on to Python, I'm going to show you two ways to do it in Python. The first is the hard way. The hard way means you build the request yourself and parse the JSON and do all of that work. So you can see this looks a lot like the PowerShell example. I use the requests module, which is good for making the HTTP requests. It hides a lot of the complexity and handles things like redirects and cookies. It's a very popular module. So I get the JSON response, and again, I loop through the application objects in the JSON, and I print the ID and the name. Okay. Now, why do I say that's the hard way? Well, because AppDynamics, we have a Python SDK that I built, a software development kit for our REST API that hides most of the complexity for you in terms of having to build these URLs and parse responses and things like that. So if you're using the SDK, it becomes really easy. You can see how much simpler the script is and how much easier to read. So you just create an AppDynamics client object. You point it at your controller. You notice one difference with this one is you don't even have to give it the account name. We assume the account name is customer one unless you're on a multi-tenant controller. Then you can pass in the account name if you like, but we assume. So you give it the URL, and then we just call get applications and print the ID and the name. It's really that simple. Everything else that you want to do with the REST API, if I want a list of tiers, a list of nodes, license usage, if I want to download metrics or print the metric tree, all of that is pretty much the same. It's just different get methods that you call on the AppDynamics client, and it returns a bunch of nice Python objects that you can introspect and use to generate output. Okay, so I'm going to move into installing and configuring the SDK, and then show you a couple of examples of what you can build with it. Okay, so you might be wondering, why Python? Why am I doing this in Python and not just Bash or C or C# or Ruby? The number one reason is because I happen to like Python. I think it's a great language for doing things quickly. I'm familiar with it. And so I built the SDK for other people to build stuff with it. But there are a lot of good reasons to consider Python exactly for this kind of usage. It's great for gluing different things together. If you need to make a script to get some data from Salesforce and output it as a comma delimited CSV, you can do that in 10 lines of Python. There's over 60,000 add-on packages and a package manager, so you don't have to invent things from scratch. And a lot of those packages offer easy connections to lots of different APIs on the net, to different software packages, many types of files and databases. It's just really easy for moving data around between systems and connecting things together. So I'm going to use Python for my examples. But again, you could do this in your favorite language anytime you like. So installing the Python SDK. If you've done this before, you know we used to tell people, go to our community site, go to the extensions, download the SDK, unzip it, run setup.py. There was a whole set of steps involved. A couple of months ago, we published the extension to PyPy, the Python Package Index, which means it's now publicly available. It's still on the community site, but it's now available right in PyPy, which means you can use that package manager to automatically install the SDK. It's a lot less work. It basically boils down to a couple of commands now. So if you don't have Python already, you obviously first need to download and install Python. They have packages built for pretty much any operating system, Mac, Windows, lots of flavors of Unix, if it's not included already. And then you need pip, which is the Python package manager. Again, if you have a recent version of Python, you may already have pip. Just go to the command line and type pip. If you don't have it, then here are the instructions to get pip and install it. So assuming you have Python and pip, you can skip ahead to step 3. It's really easy. You just say pip install AppDynamics REST. That'll download our SDK along with all of the packages that it requires as dependencies, and then you're ready to go. You can start coding. Okay, so going back to that hello world script, right? Here's what we had. I'm going to switch to a live view and actually show you working with the SDK and the script to do the same thing. So if I go over to PyCharm, okay, PyCharm is a free Python IDE from the same people that make IntelliJ and WebStorm. It's great for testing and debugging Python stuff. So here's the same script. I create my AppDynamics client. I point it at my controller on localhost, and then I'm going to call get applications. Now, one thing I like about using PyCharm as opposed to just a text editor, or Notepad, or VI, or something like that, is that it actually gives you pop-up help and completion on objects. So, for example, if I type C dot, it's going to give me a list of all of the REST API calls that I can make. So I get the list of applications, I can get a list of tiers, metrics, license usage. You can see all the options here. Okay, so that makes it really easy to write your script. All right. So now that I have this, I can take my script and run it. And, oop, I ran the wrong one. No wonder. Here's the right script. Okay, so if I run that, there we go. I get a list of my business applications. There's the app ID and there's the app name. Okay, on my test controller, I only have one application right now. And it's our standard demo, the Acme bookstore. And I have a test load running on it. So when I ask for applications, I get that. Okay. If I also wanted a list of tiers, I could easily do that. So to get tiers, you need to know which application they belong to. So I pass in the application ID. I'll even indent it a little bit so you get a nice outline view of applications and tiers. And so you see the application, and you see under that the list of tiers. Okay. So maybe I just want a list of all of the nodes across the entire application. This is one I get a lot from customers. I need to see a list of every machine that's got an agent installed across all the applications on the controller. I don't care what tier they're in, what app they're in. I just need a list of all the machines that have agents installed. Okay, well, easy enough. Get the node ID, get the node name, maybe the node type. So there you go. Now I've got my list, and you can see 3 of them are Tomcat servers, and one is it comes back as other, but it's a standalone JVM. You may see other types of nodes returned as other, like PHP does that, I believe. So one of the things we've done in the new 4.1 release is we've added a new field to the REST API for nodes that returns a new field called agent type. So let me show you what that looks like. Okay, so there's the type other. That's the one that we used to report. Okay, but if it's other, you can't tell if it's a standalone JVM or a PHP or Node.js or something else. So down here we have a new field called agent type. Okay, app agent means it's a Java agent. You might see .NET agent, PHP agent, machine agent. There's all different types here, but this field is a little more accurate than the other type, and this one is part of the 4.1 release. If you haven't gotten the email or you've opted out of our marketing emails, you should know that AppDynamics 4.1 dropped this week. It's now out. It's on the download site. Feel free to grab it and start upgrading your dev and test controllers so that you can play with some of the new features. Okay. But that's our basic hello world script. I could go further and get things like metrics. For example, maybe I have a company dashboard that's already built. Maybe it's on our intranet, something like that, and I want to take some information from AppDynamics and bring that into the dashboard. Maybe I want a list of top business transactions or something like that. Okay, so as you might guess, that's pretty easy. What you're looking for are metrics. You're looking for an average response time metric, let's say. So in the first webinar, I think Brad covered this. What you need to know is the metric path. So if I drill in the controller and go into my application, I go to the metric browser, okay, and I can find the metric that I want. Let's say I'm looking for performance of one of my key transactions. So in a typical e-commerce application, I want to know things like send to cart or checkout or payment. Those are transactions I want to monitor. Maybe I want to put them on my company dashboard so the CEO and the CIO can see it. I don't know. So I'll take one of these as an example, the add to cart. Okay, oops, wrong metric. There we go, average response time. And naturally, it's not reporting anything when I want it to. Okay, let me try a different metric. I'll make sure that my test script is still running. Hang on one second. It's Murphy's Law of demos, right? Everything goes wrong when you're, nope, there it is. Okay. So let me see. All right, so that business transaction is getting some traffic, so let's try that one. So I'll come back into my metric browser. I go to BTs, my e-commerce. I'll look at this one. Average response time. Come on now, there we go. Okay, so I've got a nice chart in AppDynamics, but how do I get the data out of AppDynamics, right? So I want to use the SDK to get this data and export it somehow. maybe to comma delimited, maybe to XML, maybe push it into a database that gets picked up by another dashboard, whatever. So what I need is the metric path. Okay, it's how I got to this point. So it's business transaction performance, BTs, e-commerce, BT name, and then scrolling down to average response time. Okay, there's an easy way to do this. You can right-click on the name of a metric and copy the path. Okay, that puts it on the clipboard. Now I can come back over here and paste that into my script. Okay, so I'm going to call get metrics. The metric path is what I just pasted in. There's the name of the application that I want the metrics for. And then what time range do I want? Okay, so I'm going to select the last 60 minutes. You could just as easily do the last hour, the last 15 minutes, the last 24 hours, or you could pick a specific time range and say, give me, you know, yesterday leading up to midnight, something like that. You just change the parameters here. The app ID, you can pass in either the name or the application ID. So in our script earlier, we saw when we printed out the application IDs and names, we saw that Acme Bookstore was application ID 10, right? So I can either pass in Acme Bookstore or I could just say 10. Either one works. And if I run this script, so you can see I get a data point once per minute with the average response times. Okay, and again, if I want to output this as CSV or XML or something else, it's an easy, you know, couple line change. Okay, now you notice this is response time for a single BT, right? Maybe I want the top 10 BTs or I want all BTs. So some people would, you know, copy and paste the same section and just change the metric name. There's a much easier way to do it. It's kind of a trick, but in the metric path, you can always take any segment of the path and actually replace it with a wildcard. So for example, I can do this with an asterisk, and that will give me average response time for all of the business transactions in the e-commerce server tier. I can even wildcard again and say, give me average response time for all BTs across all tiers. Okay, and that's what this script does. So you can see I'm doing all BTs, all tiers. And then the only difference here is I loop through the metrics and I actually grab the metric name and I print the metric name in addition to the response times. So let's see what that looks like. The script. There we go. So you see for each of my BTs, there's the BT name and it's reporting the response times. Okay, and again, these things only take a couple of minutes to write. Now you might wonder how I got this part, right? How did I take the metric path and split it up to get the name of the BT? Well, it's really simple. I used the Python debugger and I set a breakpoint to see what the path looked like, okay? So in PyCharm, setting a debugger, you just click on the side next to the code, and instead of clicking run, you click the little bug next to it, which is debug, okay? So it started my script. It stopped at the point of the breakpoint. Okay, so there's a couple of objects down here. Right, I'm looping through the metrics. I have one called metric. So you see here, metric is an object of type metric data single. Okay, and then you see the path. So this is the actual path for this metric. Remember, we're returning, because we have a wildcard, we're returning multiple metrics, right? So the metrics are a collection There's 8 items in the collection, 1 for each business transaction that we have. Each one has a path and a list of metric values. Those are the data points that you see in the chart. Okay, so I take this path and I noticed, see if I can, see if I can bring that up. There we go. So this is the metric path that's returned by the API. And you can see it looks just like the path that we copied out of the metric browser. The very last segment is the average response time, and just before that is the name of the BT. So if I take that string and I split it based on the pipe symbol, -2 means the second component from the end. So the component on the end was just average response time. The component before that, -2, would be the BT name. So I print the BT name, I loop through the metric values, and I print the average response time for each one. Okay, so I'm at a breakpoint. I can just click this to let the script finish. It's going to run to the next breakpoint, and you can see the value of the metric variable has changed. We're now looping on a different metric. So if I keep hitting run, it's going to keep stopping at the breakpoint. So I can shut off the breakpoint, let the script run, and there we've got the same output as before. All right, so you can use the same concept to get data out of AppDynamics, push it into your custom dashboards, push it into other scripts, push it into a data warehouse, whatever you need to do. Okay, so this is a review of the script that we just did. All of this code is in the PowerPoint. You can cut and paste it into your own scripts. We usually post the PowerPoint and a recording of the broadcast on our site later, so you'll be able to view the slides and copy the code out of it. Okay, so let's move on to a fun and interesting example. This is another one customers ask for all the time, right? Especially our bigger enterprise customers when they've got lots of licenses deployed across lots of application teams, and they want to know who's consuming the licenses and how is it trending over time and when are we going to need to buy more and things like that. So the objective here is to use the REST API to get a count of the licenses used, split it out by type of product, and then make a nice chart. Okay, so we're going to do this with the Python and the REST SDK, and then we're going to use a component from the package index called PyGal, which makes nice, pretty charts for us. Okay, and as you'd expect by this point, you saw how easy it was to get metrics. So getting the data and making a chart is pretty easy. Now, license usage is something that was added to the REST API with 4.0. So if you're on a 3.9 or 3.8 or 3.7 controller, this script won't work for you. But once you upgrade to 4.0 or 4.1, there's actually a entirely new REST API endpoint that enables license usage and enabling and disabling health rules and a couple of other fun things. And it's continually being built out with each release. We're adding more capabilities to it. Okay, so the original kind of version 1 API was always localhost/controller/REST. The new one is localhost/controller/API. Okay, and that's how you know if it's the version 1 or the version 2 API. All right, but here's an example. So, and this looks complicated, but hopefully if you've kept up with me to this point, it's not a surprise. So we create our AppDynamics client. In order to get license usage, we need to know what account we're talking about. So I need to get my account. And then the next section just calculates the start and end dates. So I want 15 days worth of usage. I figure out that the end date of the report was midnight as of today, and the start date is 15 days before that. Okay, and then I use my client to just call get license usage from my account. So let's see what that looks like. So I get the license usage, and I sort it to get a list of all the products that are returned. Okay, and for this example, I'm going to filter out any licenses that belong to EUM and analytics, just because those are usually measured in thousands or millions of licenses, and it would tend to throw the chart off. So I'm only going to look at agent licenses in this one. So I filter out based on the word EUM or analytics not appearing in the license key. And then I do some quick Python to reorganize the data by product ID and by date. So I build a little dictionary here of usage by product. And then I'm using PyGal to make a bar chart. And you can see the X labels along the bottom are going to be the dates. And then I have a stacked bar chart, different color for each product. I render it to a file, and then I can include that file in an email or a dashboard or web page or whatever. Okay, so if I run that script, it takes a few seconds. You can see there's no output. It just generated that file. Okay. So here's what that looks like in my browser. Okay, and you can see even as you hover over, you've got the actual data points, and you've got the legend over here. So you can actually see how the use of Java licenses changes over time. And then you've got machine agent licenses, .NET licenses, all of that. Okay. So you can go far back in time. There's also a real-time version of this report. So the license usage returned by the API usually goes hour by hour. Okay. The real-time version actually does it in 5-minute increments. So you can see here I did get license usage. There's also a get license usage 5 minutes, but that only returns 4 hours worth of data at most. After that, the license usage data gets aggregated up just like all other metrics in AppDynamics do. So we don't have 5-minute data, we have 1 hour data. But that goes back as far as you want. So in this case, I'm using the 1 hour version. I'm sorting it by date and product, and then I generate this nice chart. Okay. If you wanted to make different charts for the Java guys, for the .NET guys, you could easily do that. There's an additional parameter you can pass into the get license usage where it asks for which license module do you want. So I said Java. So in this case, it's reporting the same license usage data, it's just filtering it for only Java. And now I've got a chart of just the Java usage. So maybe I give this to the Java guys and say, you know, hey, I noticed you added 20 more agents the other day. I don't remember giving you permission to do that. Aha, now you caught them red-handed, right? So this way you can track your license usage over time, you can generate reports, and of course you could use PyGal to do similar things with metric values or a count of the number of applications that have been onboarded, anything you can think of. So all of this code is in the PowerPoint if you want to take a look at it later. If you have any questions about it, you can always feel free to reach out to me. Again, that's the output and what it looks like. So one of the use cases that people ask about a lot is there any way programmatically to enable and disable health rules or policies? And why would you want to do that? Well, if you have standard maintenance windows where you take the application down, you reboot the servers, maybe you have a code deployment scheduled. What's going to happen in AppDynamics, right? You may have health rules that alert you because an agent is down or because response time is higher than normal because you're taking servers down. or, all kinds of health rules you may have set up to monitor the health of the system, and they're all suddenly going to start throwing alerts because the servers aren't there anymore. So a lot of customers have said, well, can I integrate this into my deployment script? Turn off the health rules, run my deployment, turn the health rules back on. Well, it turns out now you can. So we can do this, again, with Python, with the AppDynamics REST SDK version 2. And if you're paying attention, you're probably wondering, hey, what is version 2? I don't remember version 2. Version 2 is still in development, but I'm going to show it to you today and give you a preview. It's close to release. What happened is I started rewriting the SDK from scratch. When we built our REST API 2.0, which was a much more modern and RESTful interface, so there's get and put and delete on many different types of resources, I thought we really needed an SDK that mirrored that. So rather than have one object, an AppDynamics client, and a whole bunch of methods that you call on that, we now have more of an object model approach. So whereas before, to get a list of nodes, you would call get nodes and pass in the app and tier, now you can actually call give me application 10 and then give me tier 12 and give me a list of nodes. Or you can even use the names, okay? So one of the new features in the REST API is to get the license usage. So one of the first things I added to the new SDK. So in the new SDK, we support a whole bunch of new features. You can get a list of tenant accounts if you run multi-tenant. You can get a list of users. You can get policies and health rules, enable and disable them. You can get license usage. You can get your license status, the number of licenses you purchased, the expiration date, which products are licensed, all of that. Configuration import and export, and you have the ability to do what are called app agent operations. If you've ever worked with support and they asked you for log files from the agent, now you can do that through the SDK just as easily as you could do it through the user interface. So you can take thread dumps, you can gather log files, gather debug logs. All of that is part of the V2 SDK, which will be coming out soon. Okay, so in this case, we want to look at health rules. And this is really easy, stupid easy, as a matter of fact. So you can see the basic structure looks exactly like the old or the classic SDK. The only difference is instead of an AppDynamics client object, you now have an AppDynamics service object. Okay, you're still passing in the same things, the URL, username, password. And I ask it for my account and application Acme Bookstore. And then I see for each rule in the health rules, I disable. Okay, so this loops through and disables all the health rules in the application. Now I can go ahead with my code deployment. And after I'm done, I turn them back on. Okay, so we'll see if we can do this live. Keep in mind, this is not a finished product yet. So if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But we'll give it a try. Okay. So here's that same script. I'm going to go through my application 10, my Acme Bookstore, disable all the health rules. And you can see it doesn't output anything, but if I go back into the user interface, and look at my health rules, they are now all disabled. So now I'm free to do my deployment without getting false alerts. When I'm done, I just come back and reverse the process. And obviously, you would have these scripts ahead of time and just have them ready to go to run from the command line. But I can reverse the process. I come back here, reload the screen. All my health rules are enabled again. I'll start getting alerts. It's that easy. Okay. So this is what we saw, and then we come back, run enable, it turns them all back on. Okay. That was really all I had in terms of examples. I'm interested to hear your questions. So, Caitlin, we're going to open it up for questions. Feel free to ask about anything that you saw with the API, how to install it, how to do your own thing in Python. Just consider this open office hours. So we have a question, which Python version do I recommend? So I'll start by saying that the SDK is actually compatible with Python 2.6, 2.7, 3.3, and 3.4, which covers most people. I would say the vast majority of users are still on Python 2.7. And that's what I use. It's what I actually use to develop the SDK itself. People are slowly moving towards Python 3. The SDK is compatible, but in terms of if you want maximum availability and compatibility, you want a version that's guaranteed to be on most systems, I would say 2.7. So not a question, we have a comment, nice presentation. Thank you very much. We will have a copy posted online if you want to look at it later. So another question, I assume Python the most preferred or best supported way to interact with AppDynamics. I said at the beginning that this is all just HTTP and JSON parsing or XML parsing. You can do it in pretty much any language in existence. I chose to do this webinar in Python because I like Python. We also have an SDK that's built for Java that does very similar things to mine in terms of hiding most of the complexity, making it easy for you to focus on your application logic and not the hassle of making HTTP calls. And that's out on our community site also. So we have stuff pre-built for Python and Java, but as I showed, you can do it in Bash, you can do it in PowerShell, you could do it in just about any language that you want. Any other questions? Oh, one thing I'll explain while we're waiting for more questions to come from the audience. One thing people have asked me is, how do I put Python and the SDK on my server if I'm not connected to the internet? Because tools like pip will download and install these things for you, right? So we do have offline copies available. So this is the Python package index page for AppDynamics REST. If you scroll down to releases, oh, sorry, this is my author view. If you scroll down to the bottom, there you go. So you can actually download a copy of the package. It's called a wheel package. You can download this offline, and we even have the checksums there if you want to make sure you downloaded a good copy. So you can take this, download it offline, copy it, FTP it over to your server, and then just do pip install file name and install the package that way. Okay, it's much easier if you're online and connected to pip, because then, for example, you can do something like this. So I'm starting with a brand new environment, no packages installed. I do pip install AppDynamics REST, and you can see it installed, downloaded and installed not only AppDynamics, but all of the requirements like requests and argparse, things like that. And now I'm ready to go. Okay, so we have another question. How do you get data out of a BT? I looked at the example and it appears to be multi-step. We want to compare BT. Okay, so how do you get data out of a BT? Can we be more specific? Whoever asked the question, if you want to repeat, what kind of data are you looking to get out? And then maybe I can help answer the question. Compare BTs across apps. Okay. So really that's a matter of making several API calls and then using Python to compare the data. I don't know if I have a real live example that I can do. But basically you would take this call to get metrics and repeat it across different applications, and you could build up a data structure, a list or a dictionary of applications and BTs, and then output them together, compare them against each other, something like that. Okay, I don't know if that answers the question. I don't really have a live example. My demo controller only has one application on it. Okay. So someone else asked, when will I have a more definite availability date for the version 2 of the SDK? The answer to that is hopefully soon. I'm working on it, and you can see it's good enough for me to demo right now. I've been working with our product managers on cleaning up a few things in the API itself that are required by the SDK. A couple of minor bugs and things like that they're working on. So once we have all that done, I should be releasing it this summer. Will it be available simultaneously on Python and Java? I didn't write the Java SDK. I know who did, and I can talk to the author about whether he's going to support the version 2 API. I'll try to find out and get an answer for you. I only control the Python version. Okay. Any other questions? Well, while we're waiting, I will take a minute to plug another tool that I built that may interest some of you. Also on the Python package index, we have a tool called the AppDynamics Downloader. And basically what this is a command line utility that automates downloading products from the AppDynamics site. So if you want to download the latest version of the agent or the controller, the EUM processor, whatever you need, this is basically a scriptable interface. You just put in the username and password, the same ones you would use to log into the download site. It downloads the product, even verifies the checksum to make sure that it's good, and saves it in your current directory. Somebody had a question?
Yeah, Todd, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Oh, there you are. So this is Brian and Jack and a whole Postal Service team. They were asking about documentation on the REST API itself. On the, you know, they're a little bit, they're not Python, so they're wondering about doing some of the stuff more natively. Can you talk through the documentation? I figured other people want to hear about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go into our documentation site, I'll go back to the home page. you can just go to the easiest way. The way I usually do it is I go to the search page and type in REST API, and I come back with use the AppDynamics REST API. Okay. So this page is mostly the version 1 API. So it explains, here's the example I used for the hello world, right? Getting the list of applications. It gives you the input and output parameters, what the sample output should look like. It covers most of the version 1 stuff, okay? So you see getting metrics, getting events, getting snapshots, all of those things. The version 2 API, the documentation is being slowly built out, but there's also a live tool that's included with the controller that makes the version 2 API somewhat self-documenting. You see that here. So for example, I can go to...
This is 4.0 only though.
Yeah. 4.1.
Yeah,
4.0 above. Yeah, will be a first.
Yeah, the version 2 API is 4.0 and 4.1. But if you have 4.0, you can use this, go to your controller, go to /API docs/index, and it brings up this tool called Swagger. And if you expand the account section, you can see here are all of the new API endpoints, along with what type of HTTP command you need to send, get, post, put, delete. And if you click on any of these, you actually get a workbench where you can try them out. So I can test it. And I totally don't remember the password for demo. We recently, yeah, it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 anymore. We recently had to change the passwords due to a couple of information leaks on GitHub. We had some people that checked scripts into GitHub that still had demo passwords and things in them, and I have to admit I'm one of the guilty parties. So we, yeah, hey, at least it wasn't a customer controller, right? It was just a demo server.
Probably
so. We, as a precaution, I mean, there's no customer data on them, but just to protect things, we went out and changed all the demo passwords, and I'll be darned if I can remember what it is right now. But assuming you have it, or have a password to your own controller, you actually have the ability to try each of these requests live, okay? And my goal with the version 2 SDK is to support every single one of these on the first release. So you can see license model usage, users, account information, enabling and disabling policies, health rules, all of that stuff. So there's a bunch of new functionality. And with each release from now on in, we're going to be filling this in and adding a little bit more. One thing people have asked for is, how can I export a flow map with all the connections? So that's being worked on. There's a bunch of other things we're doing, but we're definitely considering customer needs. So if there's something you would like to see in the API that's not there today, talk to your TAM or open a support ticket, make your feelings known, and I'm working with the product managers to try and prioritize these and get things into the releases as quickly as we can. So we want to hear from you guys.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Todd.
Any other questions from the Postal Service?
Although they're licking their lips, and I have a feeling I'm going to be pinging you with lots of stuff.
I think they're making a list.
Good. That's great. That's great. And I know, I think Jesse's been playing with it already, right?
Ken, yeah.
But yeah.
Oh, Ken. Sorry. Jesse, Ken, it's all the same thing. Nah, I'm just.
They're slapping each other as you say that.
No. Yeah. Let's see, a couple more questions. How about controller data? Can we pull that out? Metrics for controllers so we can compare our controllers. Okay. This is this is secret black belt ninja stuff. I don't know if you guys know this, but with every AppDynamics controller, there is also an agent installed on the controller itself that reports on the health of the controller. So if you remember if you installed your own controller and the installer asks you for a root password, you can actually log into AppDynamics with the root account and the root password. See if I can do this. And you can actually view the health of your controller. That's interesting. Okay, I guess my test development box doesn't actually have the agent installed on the controller, but I'll have to remember that for next time. So the answer to the question is, if you change the credentials in the script to use that root username and password, you can then access the metrics for the root account, which means you can get all the metrics on controller health and response time and things like that, just the same way you could if you were logged in as customer one. Okay? So if you want to generate a report about the health of the controller, that's one way to do it. Okay, let's see. Next question. Can I use the REST API to export policies, health rules, and actions from one application and import into another application? The answer to that is yes. There is a separate API for that. It's also in the documentation on a separate page. So we give examples of using curl to get your BT detection rules as XML that you can then import and export. And I am planning to add this to the SDK, but it's not in there yet. But we do have customers doing this from the command line today. So when they deploy from, QA to production, they'll connect to their QA controller, they'll export the BT rules from QA, and when they deploy the code to production, they deploy the BT rules as well. Okay. Similarly, there are APIs for importing and exporting custom dashboards. Okay, so you can do it with the UI, but there's also, here you go, a REST API to import and export custom dashboard definitions. So again, if you have multiple controllers, you can export a custom dashboard and take it to another controller or another environment if you're multi-tenant, that kind of thing. Any other questions? I saw somebody ask, does that really say Swagger? Yes, that is the name of the tool. That it's an open source library called Swagger that's made for testing REST APIs, so we didn't come up with it. But yes, it is called Swagger. What else would you guys like to know? I don't see any more questions coming in, but we're going to keep the line open for a few more minutes, just if anyone thinks of a question. We would also love to hear your feedback. After the webinar is over, please email me or email the education team. Let us know what you thought, if we hit the right topics, if there are other things you would have liked to have seen, if you have suggestions for future topics. We plan to make this a regular series, so obviously we want to know what people want to see. If you registered for the webinar, you should probably also get an email, I think, with a survey asking a couple of questions. That's a good way to get us feedback too. For those of you that are still on the line, can you tell me what you're doing with the REST API or planning to do? Just give me some idea of the use cases. What would you like to do with it? Either type the message into the chat, or we can unmute you if you prefer. Don't all speak up at once now. Okay, we'll give it one more minute for any final questions, and if not, then we'll wrap it up. Looking to pull, so we have a question, looking to pull data so we know what clients are located in which controller. I guess the answer to that depends on how you identify clients in AppDynamics. If you're running a multi-tenant controller and each client is a separate tenant, you could use the new API, and there's a way to get a list of accounts. Each account is a tenant on the controller. So you could use the API to get a list of accounts, and those would be your clients. If your clients are defined in terms of BTs or a custom data collector you've built, it's really hard to know without knowing how you define your clients. But I mean, in general, if it's there in the metric browser, you can get it with the API. If it's there as metadata, as an application name, a tier name, a tenant name, you can get that with the API. Any more questions? Oh, so account equals application name. No, so an account is for a multi-tenant controller. If you have a standard controller, you usually only have one account, and it's called customer one. In fact, you may not even be aware of it. It's only if you are running a multi-tenant controller, then you would have multiple accounts. So each account is like a separate installation of AppDynamics. Each account has applications, tiers, and nodes underneath it. So no, an account is not the same as an application, but under each account, you can get a list of the applications. And that would be this call right here. One final question: deploy health rules, policies, actions, dashboards across application. Is this a good topic? Yeah, I think that's a great idea for a topic. Maybe even part of a larger webinar on how do you manage multiple environments. I know this is a question we get in the field a lot. Customers have a prod controller and a pre-prod controller, and they give everyone the ability to create their configuration in the pre-prod controller, and then they want to know, how do we move all of that from dev to QA, or QA to UAT, or UAT to production? I think it would be great if we did a webinar on that topic in the future. So we'll look to developing one. Thanks for the idea. Someone just asked about gathering data from BTs across applications for comparison. I think we covered that earlier. Like I said, you would, see if I get the right window up. You would basically have to make multiple calls. You can only get metrics for one application at a time. So you would need to make multiple calls to get metrics and just pass in different application IDs and different BT names in the metric path, right? So you make a call to application A, you make a call to get metrics for application B, and then you can compare them or output them. Okay, if nobody else has questions, I guess we'll wrap it up. Thank you all very much for attending. I appreciate your time, and please don't forget to give us feedback.